Okay, so let's talk about the analysis questions. The first question was, how did you change the magnitude of unbalanced force? Remember that the unbalanced force was the Earth pulling on that mass hanging at the bottom. So to change that amount of unbalanced force, think about how we increased the Earth's force. Remember, we calculated it using weight equals 9.8 meters per second squared times mass, because we were talking about Earth. So if we change this amount of mass, we will then change the amount of weight. So we did not ensure that the mass stayed constant. You can skip that question. And then in this question, it's really asking what changed on your position versus time graph. So take a look at your graphs and see what makes them different. So maybe in run 1, the parabola looked like this, and then in run 2, the parabola was narrower. So you might talk about the narrow, how narrow or wide the parabola is. You could also talk about the steepness in this case. So again, when you're looking at the next question, we're also talking about what on the graph changed. So look at your graphs. You should have, various straight line parts. Compare this kind of straight line to that one. Remember, we're really talking here about that thing that's changing. As the graph gets steeper, what's changing is the slope. Okay, so if we continue, it's not going to let me do that. If we continue down, critical thinking, you'll notice that you should be able to analyze the slopes of your position or your velocity versus time graphs using sentences. You should have done that as part of your analysis. The meaning of the slope tells us, as time goes by equal amounts, the speed of cart 1 goes up by this many meters per second. And this physical quantity I'm talking about here, that change in velocity, is called acceleration. So the slope of a velocity versus time graph is the acceleration of an object. Now remember, you may not know this yet, but acceleration doesn't always mean speeding up. It means any change in the velocity. So if an object slows down, that's also called acceleration in physics. You may have heard the word deceleration. We don't use that word really in physics. There's no such thing. Because acceleration means change in velocity. It doesn't just mean to speed up like it does outside of physics. So really learn that vocabulary word, acceleration, as the change in velocity. You can find acceleration using the slope of a velocity versus time graph. You're going to do some more practice with this on a problem set tomorrow. So then we have to look at the motion maps. Compare and contrast. Compare, is meaning say what's the same about those motion maps. Contrast is say what is different or describe what is different. Okay? So you really want to focus on the motion map itself. The first cart has 1 net force, 2 newtons, and the other has twice as much net force. Qualitatively means use your words to tell us what would be the same about those 2 carts, motion maps, not the carts themselves, but the motion maps, and what's different about those motion maps. And then you're asked to do that for the position versus time graphs. Think back, I don't know why those drew down there. Think back to the analysis question about what changes on the parabola. Which kind of force has a greater steepness to the parabola? Which is the greater force or the lesser force? Which force, the bigger force or the smaller force, will have a steeper velocity versus time graph? So really think about those graphs. When I ask you down here to write a law or a rule, I just want a general sentence. So if you can think of a rule based on what you've read, what you've observed, what you've read, things like that, a rule that talks about the amount of force and that acceleration, the slope of the velocity versus time graph, started out with as the net force gets bigger, the slope, and then tell us what happens to the slope. That's all you need to do for that. And then Use easy to define terms. Define terms that people might not know, like velocity and net force. So 2 to 3 sentences on that one. And then the why do I care question is really, why do you care? I really want to know, how do you think this activity will help you? Okay? So I want you to sort of connect it to that activity. If you have other questions, post them as comments to the Schoology assignment. Remember, this is a summative assessment, so you should be answering these questions on your own. Your to-do list, make sure that you print and attach your graphs. Okay, that needs to be done before you come to class. Don't come to class will start, and then ask to go print your graphs. You need to do it before class. You all have at least a lunch period before class tomorrow. We're the last class of the day. So if you need to swing by the library or the humanities building or the student printers in science to pick up that printout, you need to make sure that's done. Then staple that to your lab and you should be all set. So again, if you have questions, post them as comments. Maybe your classmates can answer them, but don't just ask, what did you get for number 3? They should be questions that help you think of the answer, not get the answer from somebody else.